If a stranger handed you the key to his entire life, would you keep it? The rain slammed against the glass walls of Blackwood Tower as Sophie Bennett pushed her cleaning cart through the silent penthouse hallway on the 82nd floor. Midnight shifts paid an extra $4 an hour, and right now, $4 mattered. Her landlord had taped another warning notice to her apartment door that morning. 3 overdue payments. Final notice. Sophie tried not to think about it as she wiped fingerprints from a marble counter bigger than her tiny Brooklyn kitchen. The penthouse felt unreal. Warm golden lights reflected across polished floors. A piano sat near the windows overlooking Manhattan like something from a movie she could never afford to watch in theaters. Sophie adjusted the sleeves of her oversized gray hoodie and glanced at the expensive watch left carelessly beside a crystal glass. One watch on that counter probably cost more than her car. Not that her car still worked. She let out a tired breath and pushed her cart farther down the hallway. Just clean the office and leave before midnight. The house manager had told her downstairs. Easy enough. Rich people usually weren't home this late anyway. They were at galas, private dinners, or somewhere high above normal life. Sophie reached the office doors and stopped. The lights inside flickered once. Then everything went black. The entire penthouse fell silent. Even the soft jazz music playing through hidden speakers disappeared. Sophie froze beside her cart, her heartbeat suddenly loud in the darkness. Somewhere upstairs, glass shattered. She nearly dropped the spray bottle in her hand. Another sound followed. Fast footsteps. Then silence again. "Hello," she called nervously. No answer. The storm outside growled against the windows. Sophie grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. Of course. 82 floors up in a billionaire's penthouse during a storm. Perfect. She should leave. Any normal person would leave. But then she heard it. A low groan somewhere above her. Human. Hurt. Sophie swallowed hard and slowly stepped toward the staircase leading to the upper level. Every step creaked beneath. Her sneakers. The darkness made the penthouse feel colder now, less beautiful. Shadows stretched across the walls like strangers hiding in corners. At the top of the stairs, moonlight spilled through giant windows onto broken glass scattered across the floor. A chair had been knocked over beside the bar. Papers drifted near the fireplace. And near the windows, a man in a black suit leaned heavily against the wall, breathing unevenly. Sophie stopped instantly. He looked around 35. Dark hair slightly messy now. White dress shirt wrinkled beneath an expensive coat. One hand pressed tightly against his side, while the other gripped the edge of a marble table like he was forcing himself to stay standing. His eyes lifted toward her slowly. Sharp blue eyes. Tired. Guarded. "You need to leave," he said quietly. Sophie didn't move. "Sir, are you okay?" A weak laugh escaped him. "Does it look like I'm okay?" She should have been scared of him. Maybe she was. But something about the way he stood there alone in that massive penthouse felt less dangerous and more broken. Like a man carrying too much weight for too long. Another loud noise echoed somewhere deep in the building below them. The man's expression changed instantly. Alert. Focused. He stepped toward her quickly before stopping himself, one hand gripping the table again. "Listen to me carefully," he said, voice low and urgent. "There are people inside this building looking for something." Sophie's pulse jumped. What people? The kind you don't wait around to meet. Rain crashed harder against the windows. Helicopter lights flashed briefly across the room from somewhere outside. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver key attached to a black leather tag marked PH1. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed it into Sophie's palm. "Take this," he whispered. Sophie stared down at the key in confusion. "Why me?" For a second, the stranger just looked at her. At the cleaning cart behind her. The worn sneakers. The nervous eyes. The girl who clearly didn't belong in a penthouse like this. Then his expression softened in a way she couldn't explain. "Because you stayed." Sophie stared at the silver key resting in her palm, while rain streaked across the towering windows behind them. The black leather tag marked PH1 felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than metal and numbers. Somewhere far below, sirens echoed through Manhattan, muffled by 82 floors of glass and steel. "I do not understand," she whispered. The man leaned harder against the marble counter, his breathing uneven but controlled. "You do not need to understand yet," he said quietly. "You just need to leave." Sophie looked toward the dark staircase, then back at him. "You are hurt. I will survive." That is not exactly convincing. For the first time since she found him upstairs, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. More like surprise that she had joked at all. Another flash of helicopter light swept through the penthouse. Sophie noticed how pale he looked now beneath the dim emergency lights. Rich or not, powerful or not, he suddenly seemed exhausted in a deeply human way, like someone who had not rested in years. She tightened her grip around the key. At least let me help you sit down. You should not still be here. Yeah, well, she muttered nervously. Apparently I make bad decisions. He studied her for a second before finally nodding once. Sophie carefully stepped beside him, letting him lean part of his weight against her shoulder. Even through the expensive fabric of his coat, she could feel tension running through him like a wire pulled too tight. Together they moved toward the enormous gray sofa overlooking the skyline. Manhattan glittered outside like another universe entirely. Sophie had spent her whole life looking up at buildings like this from crowded subway platforms. She never imagined she would stand inside one beside a stranger who looked like he belonged on magazine covers. Once he sat down, he closed his eyes briefly, jaw tightening. Sophie grabbed a clean towel from her cart downstairs and returned carefully. This might sting a little, she warned softly. I have had worse nights. She hesitated before gently pressing the towel against his side over the torn shirt fabric. He inhaled sharply but did not pull away. The silence between them felt strangely intimate now. Not romantic, just honest. Two strangers trapped in the middle of a storm neither of them expected. Sophie glanced around the ruined penthouse again. Broken glass near the bar. Papers scattered across the floor. One whiskey glass spinning slowly on its side like someone left in a hurry. Who are you? She finally asked. His eyes opened slowly. Does it matter? Considering helicopters are circling your apartment, she said quietly. Yes. For a moment, he looked toward the windows instead of answering. My name is Ethan. Just Ethan. Tonight, that is enough. Sophie frowned slightly. Definitely rich people behavior, she thought. Mysterious answers and million-dollar apartments. Somewhere downstairs, elevator doors dinged faintly. Both of them froze instantly. Ethan stood too fast, gripping the edge of the sofa. Sophie instinctively stepped closer to him. Voices echoed somewhere below. Male voices. Calm. Professional. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. They are early. Sophie's stomach tightened. Who? Before he could answer, every television screen inside the penthouse suddenly flickered back on at once. A female news anchor appeared across 6 giant screens mounted into the walls. Breaking news flashed beneath her face. Blackwood Tech CEO Ethan Blackwood was reportedly involved in a security incident tonight at his Manhattan residence. Sophie slowly turned toward the man beside her. Ethan Blackwood. The Ethan Blackwood, founder of the largest artificial intelligence company in the country. Billionaire. Magazine covers. Interviews. Headlines. She had seen his face before in grocery store checkout lines and giant billboards downtown. But those cold-polished photos looked nothing like the exhausted man standing barefoot beside shattered glass now. Ethan watched realization hit her face. Now you understand why you need to leave, he said quietly. Sophie looked back down at the silver key in her hand. Suddenly the room felt smaller. Heavier. Dangerous in a way she could not explain. Then one of the televisions switched to live security footage from downstairs. 3 men in dark suits stepped into the lobby beneath Blackwood Tower, and one of them looked directly into the security camera like he already knew exactly where to find them. Sophie could not stop staring at the television screen. Ethan Blackwood. The name alone belonged to another world. Billionaires did not bleed onto marble floors. They did not sit in dark penthouses looking exhausted while storms rattled the windows behind them. But the man beside her was painfully real. Another elevator ding echoed faintly from downstairs. Ethan moved quickly now despite the tension in his expression. He crossed the room toward a sleek black cabinet built into the wall and pressed his thumb against a hidden panel. A narrow compartment slid open silently. Inside sat several phones, folders, and a small tablet glowing with security maps of the building. Sophie watched him carefully. His movements were calm, practiced, like a man used to emergencies. That frightened her more than the helicopters outside. How many exits does this place have? She whispered. Ethan glanced toward the hallway. Not enough tonight. The tablet flashed red suddenly. One of the elevators was moving upward. 82nd floor. Sophie felt her chest tighten. Should we call the police? Ethan looked at her for a long second before answering. Normally, yes. That is not comforting. Tonight is not normal. Somewhere below them, footsteps echoed faintly through the penthouse stairwell. Sophie instinctively stepped backward. Ethan noticed immediately. Hey. His voice softened slightly. Look at me. She did. You are going to be okay. Strange how those words should have sounded reassuring. Instead, they sounded like something a person says when they are not completely sure. Ethan grabbed one of the phones from the hidden compartment and dialed quickly. No answer. His jaw tightened. He tried another number. Still nothing. Sophie wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold the penthouse felt now. Her damp sneakers squeaked softly against the marble as she moved closer to the windows. Manhattan stretched endlessly below them. Tiny headlights. Tiny people. Tiny lives. Down there, someone was ordering pizza. Someone was laughing in a crowded bar. Someone was probably falling asleep on a subway ride home from work. Meanwhile, she was trapped in a billionaire's penthouse holding a mysterious silver key while unknown men searched the building downstairs. Her life had split into before and after in less than an hour. Ethan ended the call sharply and looked toward her again. Sophie. Hearing her name in his voice startled her. Yeah. How long have you worked here? Tonight was my first shift. Of course it was. Even now, a tired hint of humor touched his face for half a second. Sophie frowned. You say that like this kind of thing happens every Tuesday. Not usually on Tuesdays. She almost laughed despite herself. Almost. Another notification flashed across the tablet screen. Security access overridden. Ethan's expression changed instantly. He walked toward the living room windows and lowered the automatic privacy shades with one button. The entire penthouse darkened. Stay away from the glass, he said quietly. Sophie obeyed immediately this time. The reality of the situation was finally settling into her bones. Whoever those men were, Ethan Blackwood genuinely feared them. And powerful men were not supposed to look afraid. Ethan removed his expensive watch and placed it carefully onto the counter beside the hidden compartment. Sophie noticed his hands briefly. Small scars across his knuckles. Faint exhaustion beneath perfectly controlled movements. Not cold. Not arrogant. Just tired. Deeply tired. Why are they after you? She asked carefully. Silence stretched between them. Rain rolled softly against the shaded windows. Finally, Ethan leaned against the counter and looked down at the floor instead of at her. Because I stopped trusting the wrong people too late. Sophie did not fully understand the answer, but she understood the feeling behind it. Betrayal. Loneliness. The kind that money clearly could not fix. A loud electronic beep suddenly echoed through the penthouse. Ethan looked toward the hallway instantly. The private elevator doors downstairs had been opened. Sophie's pulse jumped hard enough to hurt. Ethan stepped toward her quickly and pressed something cold into her hand. The silver key again. Listen carefully, he whispered. If anything happens, take the service stairs to level 73. There is a private vault marked PH1. Sophie stared at him. What is inside? Ethan's blue eyes met hers directly for the first time since she found him upstairs. The reason they are here. Then the penthouse lights flickered once more, and slow footsteps began moving through the hallway outside. Sophie stopped breathing the moment the footsteps entered the penthouse hallway. Slow. Controlled. Not rushed like security responding to an emergency. Whoever was outside moved with confidence, like they already belonged there. Ethan crossed the room instantly and grabbed Sophie's wrist gently but firmly. This way. He led her through a narrow hallway beside the kitchen toward what looked like an ordinary wall covered in dark wood panels. Sophie barely had time to process anything before Ethan pressed his hand against one section. A hidden door clicked open silently. Behind it sat a small private room lined with security monitors and shelves of files. Go inside, he whispered. Sophie stared at him. What about you? I will handle this. You are not exactly in great shape to handle anything right now. Even now, she heard fear shaking beneath her own voice. Ethan looked at her for a second longer than necessary, like he wanted to say something else, something honest. But another sound echoed through the penthouse. Closer this time. Please, Sophie. The way he said her name made her finally move. She stepped inside the hidden room while Ethan partially closed the door, leaving only a narrow gap. Through it, Sophie could still see part of the living room. Her heartbeat thundered so loudly she worried someone outside might hear it. The silver key remained clenched tightly in her hand. The penthouse fell silent again for 3 unbearable seconds. Then a calm male voice drifted through the hallway. "Mr. Blackwood?" Sophie froze instantly. The voice sounded polite. "Professional. We received reports of a security malfunction upstairs." Ethan stepped into view near the living room entrance. Every trace of panic had vanished from his expression now. He looked composed again. Cold. Powerful. The billionaire from magazine covers had returned. "At midnight?" Ethan asked evenly. "I did not call security." 2 men in dark suits slowly entered the room. Sophie could only see parts of them through the narrow opening, but something about their presence made her stomach twist. Too calm. Too observant. One of them glanced briefly toward the broken glass near the windows. "We were concerned about your safety, sir." Ethan leaned casually against the marble counter despite the strain clearly hidden beneath his calm expression. "That is touching." Sophie noticed it then. The subtle tension in the room. The careful way everyone spoke around the truth instead of directly at it. Like a chess match where every word mattered. The taller man stepped farther into the penthouse. "There is another issue," he said carefully. "A sensitive company asset appears to be missing." Ethan's face revealed nothing. "And you assumed I took it?" "We assumed someone did." Silence stretched. Rain rolled softly against the windows behind them. Sophie's grip tightened around the silver key. "Asset. They were talking about whatever one protected." Ethan folded his arms slowly. "Then perhaps you should continue your investigation elsewhere." The second man's eyes drifted briefly toward the hallway, leading closer to Sophie's hiding place. Her breath caught instantly. Ethan noticed too. His posture shifted almost invisibly. "Protective. Nobody else is here tonight," he said calmly. The taller man smiled faintly, but it never reached his eyes. Of course. For one terrifying second, Sophie thought he would walk toward the hidden room anyway. Instead, he adjusted his suit jacket and stepped backward toward the elevator hallway. "Please contact us if you remember anything useful, Mr. Blackwood." Ethan gave a short nod. "Good night, gentlemen." The men disappeared from view. Seconds later, the private elevator doors closed somewhere downstairs. Silence returned to the penthouse once more. But the silence felt different now. Heavier. Sophie waited several seconds before Ethan finally reopened the hidden door fully. The moment he did, the mask dropped from his face again. He leaned one hand against the wall, exhausted. Sophie stepped toward him immediately. "They know," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." "Who are they?" Ethan looked toward the dark skyline outside the windows before answering quietly. "People I built my company with." Sophie stared at him in disbelief. "Your own partners?" "Former partners," he corrected softly. Then he looked down at the silver key, still resting in her hand. "And now they think you might have what they are looking for too." Sophie felt fear rise sharply in her chest. "I am literally a cleaning girl from Brooklyn. Tonight," Ethan said quietly, "that may be the only reason you are still safe." Sophie sat quietly on the edge of the enormous gray sofa while dawn slowly crept across Manhattan outside the penthouse windows. The storm had weakened sometime before sunrise, leaving streaks of rain across the glass like fading scars. She had not slept for a single minute. Honestly, she was not even sure her brain had fully processed the last few hours. At midnight, she had been worrying about overdue rent and whether the subway would still be running when her shift ended. Now she was sitting inside the home of one of the most powerful men in America while unknown people searched for a hidden vault key in her pocket. Ethan stood near the kitchen island pouring water into 2 crystal glasses. He had changed into a black sweater and dark sweatpants sometime before dawn, but exhaustion still shadowed his face. Without the expensive suit and controlled public image, he looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man carrying years of pressure alone. He walked over and handed Sophie one of the glasses. "You should drink something." Sophie accepted it carefully. "Thanks." Silence settled between them again. Strange how silence had started feeling normal around him already. Sophie glanced toward the giant television screens still muted across the penthouse walls. Every channel carried some version of the same story. Blackwood Tech CEO safe after security incident. Analysts speculated. Reporters guessed. Nobody seemed to know the truth. Ethan noticed her staring. By noon, the internet will invent 50 different stories about what happened tonight. Sophie looked back at him. And the real story? Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. The real story usually makes people uncomfortable. Sophie lowered the glass slowly. You still have not told me what is inside the vault. Ethan walked toward the windows before answering. Morning sunlight touched the skyline now, turning steel towers gold. Evidence, he said quietly. Proof that people inside my company have been stealing billions through illegal defense contracts. Sophie blinked in shock. Your own executives? People I trusted. He folded his arms tightly. For years I thought something felt wrong. Missing funds. Disappearing reports. Employees suddenly resigning after asking questions. Sophie watched him carefully. His voice remained calm, but pain lived underneath every word now. Then last month, he continued quietly, someone inside Blackwood Tech tried to erase the evidence before I could expose it. Sophie slowly reached into her hoodie pocket and touched the silver key again. Suddenly, the small piece of metal felt dangerous. And this vault has all the proof. Ethan nodded once. Enough to destroy careers. Enough to send powerful people to prison. Sophie stared down at the floor. So why give the key to me? Ethan was quiet for several seconds. Because everyone around me tonight already knew too much. Sophie looked up slowly. Ethan met her eyes directly. You were the only person in that penthouse who had no reason to betray me. Something about those words hit her harder than she expected. Maybe because she understood betrayal too well herself. 2 years ago, her father had emptied their family savings and disappeared with another woman halfway across the country. Since then, it had been hospital bills, second jobs, overdue rent, and pretending everything was fine while quietly drowning. Sophie laughed softly under her breath. Ethan frowned slightly. What? It is just funny. What is? She gestured around the penthouse. You trust me because I clean apartments for extra cash. For the first time all night, a real smile briefly touched Ethan's face. Small. Tired. Honest. No, he said quietly. I trust you because you stayed when leaving would have been easier. Sophie looked away quickly after that. The warmth behind his words unsettled her more than the danger outside. A loud buzz suddenly interrupted the silence. Ethan picked up one of the secure phones from the hidden compartment. His expression immediately sharpened. What happened? He asked. Sophie watched his face carefully as he listened. Whatever he heard clearly was not good. Ethan's jaw tightened slowly. Understood, he said quietly before ending the call. Sophie stood immediately. What is wrong? Ethan looked at her with an expression she had not seen before. Concern. Real concern. Someone broke into your apartment in Brooklyn an hour ago. Sophie felt the blood drain from her face instantly. What? My security contact just confirmed it. Ethan stepped closer now, voice lower. Sophie, they know your name. Sophie felt like the room tilted beneath her feet. No, she whispered instantly. No, that is not possible. Ethan stayed calm, but she could see tension tightening across his shoulders again. My security team intercepted the report 10 minutes ago. Sophie grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter with shaking hands and dialed her landlord immediately. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Her chest tightened harder with every unanswered ring. My mom's photo albums are there, she said quietly, more to herself than to Ethan. Everything I own is there. Ethan watched her carefully. Sophie. She looked up fast. I have to go back. No, the answer came instantly. Firm. You said they know my name. Which is exactly why you cannot go there. Sophie ran a hand through her hair, pacing across the marble floor. Sunlight now flooded the penthouse completely, making everything feel strangely normal despite the fear twisting through her stomach. Luxury coffee machines hummed softly in the kitchen. Traffic crawled peacefully through Manhattan below them. Somewhere downstairs, employees probably polished windows and served breakfast like nothing had happened overnight. Sophie stopped near the giant windows and wrapped her arms around herself tightly. This is insane, she whispered. I clean apartments. I ride the subway to work. I should not be hiding from corporate criminals. Ethan moved closer, but kept enough distance not to overwhelm her. You should not, he admitted quietly. Sophie laughed bitterly. Great. Glad we agree. Silence settled between them for a moment. Then Ethan spoke again, softer this time. You are not alone in this anymore. Those words landed dangerously close to her heart. Sophie looked away quickly before he could notice. She barely knew this man. 12 hours ago, he had been a stranger in a dark penthouse. Yet somehow his presence already felt steadier than people she had trusted for years. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He glanced down at the screen before looking back at her. My driver is bringing clothes and essentials for you. Sophie blinked. Excuse me. You cannot return to Brooklyn right now. Ethan, until we know who inside Blackwood Tech is involved, you stay here. Sophie stared at him in disbelief. In your penthouse? It is the safest place I can secure quickly. She let out another nervous laugh. I do not think a billionaire's penthouse counts as normal safe. Fair point. Despite everything, a small smile touched his face again. Sophie hated how much calmer that smile made her feel. She walked toward the kitchen slowly, trying to process the reality of her life now. Expensive marble counters. Fresh flowers taller than her. A refrigerator probably worth more than her yearly rent. And somehow Ethan Blackwood stood in the middle of it all, looking less comfortable than she did. Sophie opened the fridge and froze. It was almost empty except for bottled water, takeout containers, and energy drinks. She turned toward him slowly. Please do not tell me this is all you eat. Ethan leaned against the counter. I travel a lot. That is rich person code for terrible eating habits. Probably. Sophie shook her head and searched through the cabinets instead. You own a $70 million penthouse and somehow have no actual groceries. I was not expecting judgment this early in the morning. You are getting judgment. Ethan watched quietly as she found coffee beans and finally started making coffee like she had done it 1,000 times before. The simple domestic moment felt strangely unreal after the chaos of the night. You know, Sophie said while reaching for mugs. Most people would be panicking right now. Ethan's voice lowered slightly behind her. Most people would have left hours ago. Sophie paused briefly at the sink. Again, there it was. That quiet gratitude hidden beneath everything he said to her. She handed him a cup carefully. Their fingers brushed for half a second. Warm. Human. Real. Ethan looked down at the coffee before speaking quietly. I spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Sophie leaned against the counter across from him. And now, his blue eyes lifted toward hers. Tired but honest. Now I trust the cleaning girl who stayed. Before Sophie could answer, one of the television screens suddenly switched on automatically. A live financial news segment filled the room. The headline at the bottom froze both of them instantly. Blackwood Tech Board calls emergency meeting. Interim CEO expected to be announced today. Ethan's expression went completely still. Sophie slowly set down her coffee cup. Ethan, she whispered carefully, they are trying to replace you. Sophie stared at the television while financial analysts filled the screen behind flashing headlines and stock numbers. Interim CEO expected. Blackwood Tech shares falling. Board emergency session at noon. The reporters spoke with polished excitement, like they were discussing weather instead of a man's entire life collapsing in real time. Ethan stood motionless beside the kitchen island, coffee untouched in his hand. His face revealed almost nothing now, but Sophie could feel the shift in the room instantly. The warmth from a few minutes ago had disappeared. The billionaire mask had returned. Controlled. Sharp. Untouchable. They moved faster than I expected, he said quietly. Sophie turned toward him. Can they actually do this? Ethan gave a humorless smile. Welcome to corporate America. He walked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Morning sunlight reflected across the glass towers. Outside, beautiful and cold at the same time. The board has enough votes to suspend me temporarily if they claim I am unstable or compromised. Sophie frowned. After one night? After months of planning. Ethan slipped one hand into his pocket slowly. Last night was probably just the final push they needed. Sophie felt anger rise unexpectedly in her chest. Not fear this time. Anger. She barely knew Ethan. Yet something about seeing powerful people destroy him while pretending to be respectable made her stomach turn. So what? She asked sharply. They scare you. Take your company, and everyone acts like it is business? Ethan looked back at her carefully, almost surprised by the fire in her voice. Usually, yes. Sophie shook her head. That is insane. It is efficient. It is wrong. Silence settled between them again. Ethan studied her quietly for a second longer than usual. You really believe things should be fair, do not you? Sophie crossed her arms. Crazy concept, I know. The corner of Ethan's mouth almost lifted again. Almost. Then one of the secure phones buzzed sharply across the counter. Ethan answered immediately. Talk to me. Sophie watched his expression tighten as he listened. How bad? He asked quietly. A pause. Understood. He ended the call slowly. Sophie stepped closer. What now? Ethan set the phone down carefully before answering. The board meeting was moved up. 1 hour. Can you stop it? Not remotely. Sophie glanced toward the hidden compartment where the silver key still rested beside her coffee cup. But you have proof. Ethan nodded once. Inside the vault. Then show them. Ethan let out a low breath and looked toward the skyline again. It is not that simple. Why not? Because the moment I reveal what is inside that vault, half the people connected to it will try to bury the evidence before federal investigators can secure it. Sophie frowned. Then what were you planning to do? Ethan was quiet for several seconds before finally answering. I was planning to expose everything publicly during next month's shareholder conference. Sophie blinked. Next month. I needed time. Ethan, they are replacing you. Today. Those words hung heavily in the penthouse. Ethan knew she was right. Sophie could see it in the way his jaw tightened. For the first time since she met him, the billionaire strategist suddenly looked trapped. Not by money. Not by power. By hesitation. Sophie walked slowly toward the kitchen counter and picked up the silver key again. PH 1. Small. Cold. Somehow capable of destroying billion-dollar careers. Where is the vault? She asked quietly. Ethan looked at her immediately. Sophie, where? Level 73. Then we go get the evidence. Ethan stared at her like she had just suggested robbing a bank. Absolutely not. You said yourself they are taking your company in an hour. And you think walking into the middle of this is safe? Sophie laughed softly in disbelief. Ethan, my apartment already got searched because of this key. I think we passed safe a while ago. He stepped closer now, lowering his voice. You do not understand how dangerous these people are. Maybe not. Sophie held his gaze steadily. But I understand what it looks like when good people stay quiet because they are afraid. Something changed in Ethan's expression then. A crack in the carefully controlled armor he wore around everyone else. Sophie suddenly realized something important. Ethan Blackwood was not afraid for himself anymore. He was afraid for her. The realization hit harder than she expected. Ethan looked down briefly before speaking again, quieter this time. If we do this, there is no going back. Sophie tightened her grip around the key. Pretty sure there stopped being a way back the moment I walked into your penthouse. Then suddenly the giant television screens switched to a live press conference downstairs in Blackwood Tower. Sophie's breath caught instantly. Standing behind the podium beside the company logo was one of the men from the night before. And beneath his face, the screen displayed the words, Daniel Cross, Chief Financial Officer of Blackwood Tech. Sophie stared at Daniel Cross on the television screen while reporters crowded around the podium downstairs inside Blackwood Tower. He looked polished, calm, expensive navy suit, silver tie, the perfect public image of a trusted executive stepping in during a crisis. Blackwood Tech remains stable and fully operational, Daniel said smoothly into the microphones. The board's priority is protecting the future of this company. Ethan muted the television instantly. The silence afterward felt sharper than the reporters' voices. Sophie looked at him carefully. That is the man from last night. Ethan nodded once. Daniel has been with me since the beginning. There was no anger in his voice now. Somehow that made it worse. Sophie glanced back toward the frozen image on the screen. And he is trying to take everything from you. Ethan walked toward the hidden compartment again and grabbed a dark jacket from inside. He is trying to protect himself. By destroying you? Ethan slid the jacket on slowly. People do dangerous things when billions of dollars are involved. Sophie crossed her arms tightly. Good thing I only have $38 in my checking account. Ethan actually laughed softly at that. Brief. Real. It disappeared almost immediately, but Sophie caught it anyway. Strange how much she wanted to hear that sound again. Ethan grabbed the secure tablet and checked the building maps one more time. The vault is hidden behind an old server maintenance corridor on 73. Sophie moved closer beside him. And security? Most of the building's private security reports directly to Daniel now. So basically everybody wants us caught. Ethan looked at her. You can still walk away. Sophie shook her head immediately. No, Sophie, you trusted me with the key. She held up the silver tag marked PH, one between them. I am not abandoning this halfway through. Ethan's eyes stayed on her for a long second. Something vulnerable flickered there beneath all the control and exhaustion. You barely know me, he said quietly. Sophie gave a small shrug. Maybe, but I know what betrayal looks like. Those words landed heavily between them. Ethan looked away first. A black SUV arrived downstairs 20 minutes later through a private underground entrance beneath the tower. Ethan insisted Sophie wear one of his spare baseball caps and a dark coat, pulled tightly around her face. "I look ridiculous," she whispered while they entered a private elevator. "You look anonymous." "That is not better." Ethan pressed the button for level 73. The elevator began descending smoothly through the tower. Sophie could feel tension building again with every passing floor. The quiet hum of the elevator suddenly felt unbearably loud. Ethan stood beside her studying the security feed on the tablet. "Daniel moved additional guards near the executive conference level," he murmured. "Can he track this elevator?" "Eventually." Sophie folded her arms tighter. "You know, my biggest concern yesterday was overdue laundry." Ethan glanced sideways at her. "And now I am helping a billionaire expose financial crimes before lunch." Another small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Sophie noticed how different he looked away from cameras and boardrooms. Less polished, more human. The elevator doors opened quietly onto level 73. Unlike the luxury upper floors, this level looked industrial and forgotten. Concrete walls, dim overhead lighting, quiet server systems humming behind locked doors. Ethan led her quickly through a narrow maintenance hallway. "This part of the tower predates the renovation," he explained quietly. "Nobody comes down here anymore." Sophie followed closely beside him, sneakers echoing softly against the concrete floor. Every shadow made her nervous now. Every distant sound tightened her chest. Finally, Ethan stopped beside a plain gray steel door marked "Storage Authorized Personnel Only." "This is it." Sophie pulled out the silver key slowly. Her fingers trembled slightly. Ethan noticed immediately. "Hey." She looked up at him. "You are doing fine." The calm certainty in his voice steadied her more than it should have. Sophie inserted the key into the hidden slot beneath the handle. A soft electronic click echoed through the hallway. Then the steel door slowly opened inward. Inside sat a small secure room lined with servers and locked filing cabinets. In the center stood a single black hard drive connected to a monitor already glowing faintly in the dark. Sophie stepped inside. Carefully. This tiny thing caused all of this. Ethan's expression turned serious again. "That tiny thing contains 10 years of hidden offshore accounts, illegal defense payments, and internal communications." Sophie stared at the hard drive. Proof. Real proof. Enough to destroy powerful men. Ethan moved toward the monitor and inserted a security code. File after file appeared across the screen. Financial transfers. Confidential contracts. Recorded board discussions. Sophie felt her stomach twist. "Oh my God." Ethan nodded grimly. "Exactly." Then suddenly footsteps echoed from somewhere down the hallway outside. Fast this time. Closer. Ethan's eyes lifted instantly toward the door. "They found us." Sophie's heart slammed against her ribs as the footsteps rushed closer through the maintenance hallway outside the vault room. Ethan reacted instantly, pulling the hard drive from the monitor while shutting down the screen. The room went dark except for the faint glow of server lights blinking across the walls. "This way," he whispered. Sophie followed him deeper into the secure room until he stopped beside another steel door hidden behind the filing cabinets. "Please tell me billionaires always build secret exits," she whispered nervously. Ethan glanced at her while entering another security code. "Only the paranoid ones." The hidden door unlocked with a soft click. Ethan guided Sophie through a narrow service corridor running behind the tower's server infrastructure. Pipes lined the ceiling overhead, while emergency lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Behind them, voices echoed faintly near the vault room now. Calm voices. Controlled voices. Somehow that felt more frightening than shouting ever could. Sophie stayed close beside Ethan as they moved through the corridor. "How far does this go?" she whispered. "Private elevator near the old executive parking level." "And after that?" Ethan looked ahead quietly. "After that we make sure the truth survives." Sophie noticed the way he held the hard drive carefully against his chest now. Not like a billionaire protecting company assets. Like a man protecting the last honest part of himself. They reached the private elevator minutes later. Ethan pressed the call button repeatedly while glancing back toward the corridor. Sophie suddenly realized how exhausted he looked again. Pale, tense, running almost entirely on adrenaline and determination. The elevator doors finally slid open. Both of them stepped inside quickly. As the doors closed, Sophie let out the breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. I cannot believe this is real. Ethan leaned against the elevator wall, eyes briefly shutting. Neither can I sometimes. The elevator descended quietly through the tower. Sophie looked at him carefully. What happens once people see the files? Ethan opened his eyes slowly. Federal investigators take over. The board loses control. Daniel Cross loses everything. Sophie hesitated before asking softly, "And you?" Ethan gave a tired smile that barely reached his eyes. "That depends whether the world still wants me leading Blackwood Tech after this." Sophie frowned immediately. "You exposed corruption inside your own company. After years of missing it. You tried to stop it." Ethan looked down at the hard drive in his hands. Too late. Sophie stepped a little closer to him inside the elevator. "No," she said quietly. Too late would have been pretending none of this mattered. Ethan looked at her then. Really looked at her. No billionaire mask. No guarded corporate distance. Just Ethan. Tired. Human. Grateful. The elevator doors opened onto a private underground garage lined with black vehicles and silent concrete pillars. Ethan led her quickly toward one of the SUVs waiting near the far exit. A middle-aged man in a dark coat stepped out immediately. "Mr. Blackwood," he said with visible relief. "We secured a direct route to the federal building." Ethan handed him the hard drive carefully. "This goes directly to Agent Ramirez. No stops." The man nodded firmly and disappeared into the vehicle. Sophie watched the SUV drive away through the garage exit into Manhattan traffic. Just like that, the evidence was gone. Beyond their reach now. Safe. Ethan stood silently beside her for several seconds. Then his shoulders lowered for the first time since she met him. Not victory exactly. Relief. Sophie looked up at him carefully. "It is over?" Ethan stared toward the bright city light pouring through the garage entrance. "The dangerous part probably is not." Sophie laughed softly under her breath. "Of course it is not." Ethan turned toward her slowly. "But the lying part is." Silence settled warmly between them this time. Different from before. Softer. Honest. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. Sophie blinked in surprise when she realized what it was. Her apartment key. "My security team recovered this from your building," he said quietly. "Your landlord also agreed to repair the damage." Sophie stared at the key resting in his palm. Such a small thing. Yet suddenly it felt symbolic somehow. Home. Safety. A life waiting for her beyond survival mode. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. "Sophie, none of this would have happened without you." She shook her head lightly. "You would have figured it out." "No," his answer came instantly. "I spent years surrounded by executives, lawyers, analysts, and advisors." He looked directly into her eyes now. "But the person who saved me was the girl pushing a cleaning cart at midnight." Sophie felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Ethan smiled softly then. "Tired but real. Looks like staying was the best decision either